you get to the NHL, you got a set of skills. Could you get better at goal scoring? Yeah, maybe a little bit. Could you get better you could get better at certain things, but those guys, when I think of Yzerman, Shanahan, Robitaille, you just go down the list of the players there. They were such students of the game, and they were talking about goal scoring and other goalies' weaknesses that I never heard ever before in my career. And I'm thinking, I played over 10 years already, and I haven't seen this, and I played on several teams. It was just amazing to me the way they thought about offense and creating it and goal scoring. I just hadn't seen it, and it made me better. There's no question about it.
That was Stanley Cup champion and NHL legend Mathieu Schneider, and you are listening to episode 142 of the Up My Hockey podcast with Jason Podolin.
Just watch me now.
Welcome to Up My Hockey with Jason Podolin, where we deconstruct the NHL journey, discuss what it takes to make it, and have a few laughs along the way. I'm your host, Jason Podolin, a 31st overall draft pick who played 41 NHL games, but thought he was destined for 1,000. Learn from my story and those of my guests. This is a hockey podcast about reaching your potential. Hey there, welcome back or welcome to the Up My Hockey podcast with Jason Podolin. I'm here, your host, Jason Podolin, and you are listening to episode 142 of the Up My Hockey podcast. And today we have on special guest Mathieu Schneider. But before we get to Mathieu Schneider, we're going to have a word from our sponsors, Elite Prospects, which is the gateway to hockey. Online since 1999, EliteProspects.com is the #1 statistical hockey resource, serving over 1 million unique visitors weekly. It offers the most informative hockey player database on the web and has the most reliable transaction tracker available. For youth hockey players, EP is your very own online showcase to highlight your achievements and help secure future playing opportunities. Coaches, scouts, and schools at every level of the game consider Elite Prospects their one-stop shop to future stars and their discovery. Hockey fan crazy about the NHL, the draft, and your team's top prospects? There is no better source than EP Rinkside, providing insight and analysis on players worldwide through written features, video breakdowns, interviews, and more. Head to EliteProspects.com and experience your gateway to hockey. Thank you to Elite Prospects for partnering with UMH68 and the Up My Hockey podcast. It's great to be partnering with them. More on the UMH68 as we move forward, updating my website as we speak. If you are a youth hockey player in the major peewee or minor bantam age range and you live in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Manitoba, we will be coming there in the spring of 2025. So get your name on the watch list on my website, and we will be looking for the best players in that province, and Elite Prospects has been a part of that. So thank you very much, Elite Prospects. But we want to talk about Mathieu Schneider because Mathieu Schneider is the guest on the show today. This guy, Mathieu Schneider, just to give you a little bit of a hint, if you're a younger player here that doesn't remember, Mathieu Schneider, wasn't able to watch him play. His last season in the NHL was 2010. But prior to that, he played 1,289 NHL regular season hockey games and an additional 114 playoff games. 1,289, just to put that in perspective. That is him starting in the NHL in 89-90 and playing till 2010. That's 20 seasons of NHL action with a few lockouts in the middle. That puts him 80th all time on the games played list. Top 100 to ever play in the NHL. What a fantastic feat that is. And Mathieu Schneider was an awesome defenseman. He played for the U.S. national team. He won a Stanley Cup with Montreal back in 92-93. That's where he started his career after being a third-round draft pick to the Canadiens, 44th overall in the 87 draft. He hails from New York, so we have an American on. Like I said, played for the American national team. Was an all-star in the NHL twice. He he was top 3 in points for defensemen, I believe, multiple times, led the league in goals as a defenseman. He was all over the place, though, and he says he had a problem with not fighting with his coaches. So that was interesting. It came up a few times during the conversation. But, I mean, he was, just to give you an idea, Montreal Canadiens to start off, then to the Islanders, then to the Leafs, then to the Rangers, then to the Kings, then to the Wings, then to the Ducks, then to the Thrashers, then back to the Canadiens, and then to the Canucks, where he dipped his toe back in the AHL for 8 games because of a fight with Vigneault, and then finished his career with the Phoenix Coyotes. So all over the place, but was a producer everywhere he went. In the 1,289 games, he had 743 points as a defenseman, over half a point a game, over a 20-year career. That's insane to be that productive over 20 years as a D-man. And then again, 54 points in 114 games in the playoffs, almost a half point there as well. So he was a big-time producer. And yeah, if you're not familiar with Mathieu Schneider, it's awesome that we were able to have him on here. I will not delay this introduction anymore. We got about an hour here with Schneids. He joined us from Florida. By the way, we played together in LA for the hot minute that I was there. So connected on LinkedIn. And without further ado, I bring you a player of 1,289 NHL games and a Stanley Cup champion, Mr. Mathieu Schneider. All right. Here we are, episode 142, old teammate of mine for a hot minute in LA, Mathieu Schneider. Thanks so much for being on the program with me.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jay.
Yeah, it's I love the world, the social media world. Like as we said before, LinkedIn kind of flashed your profile in front of me the other day there and said hi, and here we are 7 days later, reconnecting for the first time in a couple decades. So awesome to see your face again, and yeah, I want to dive in, man, to the 1,300 games essentially that you played, and I don't really know where to start with that essentially, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about playing hockey in New York, growing up, what that was even like, hockey in a big city like that, and your introduction to it.
Yeah, well, there wasn't an awful lot when I was growing up, so we're going back. We're going back 40 years, 45 years.
Isn't that crazy even to say that?
Yeah, no, I know. Actually 50 years. I was 5 when I really started playing. But my dad married my mom, who was French Canadian. She came from a big French Canadian family in Rhode Island, and she was 11th of 12 kids. My dad thought my cousins would all be playing hockey. My dad was a hockey fan growing up. They had the Providence Bruins, which were Boston Bruins farm team, and went back in the original 6. So there wasn't a ton of hockey. Hockey was real regional. You had New England, Michigan, Michigan, and Minnesota were really the hockey regions. Outside of that, in the United States, there wasn't much hockey back then. But my dad started programs when I was growing up, and that's really how I started playing. He got me on the ice. I was hockey, baseball, a little bit of tennis, but that was it. And so I guess when I was probably 11 or 12 years old, I started to really focus more on hockey, and that was my passion growing up.
Right. Being from a kind of, small market in the sense of like not a lot of people playing, lots of people around you, but not a lot of people playing the game, and you obviously being good, or I assume you were good. Were you good at like 11, 12? Was it already showing that you were kind of better than everybody?
I don't think so. I guess it depends who you ask that really knew me back then. But yeah, I grew up. We had some family friends that my dad had known that played in the NHL, and that was kind of my aspiration, looking up to a couple of my heroes. There was a family called the Bennett family in Rhode Island that was really a big part of still very close to the family today, who I was particularly as it related to hockey. And there were 5 brothers. 4 of them played in the NHL. They all played college or major junior hockey, and I looked up to them. I was aspiring to be them when I was a kid, but in all honesty, I never thought in a million years I'd be playing in the NHL, and that really wasn't my goal when I was a young teenager and growing up. I was hoping to play college hockey maybe, and even back then, I'm before your time too, Podes, but there weren't a lot of college hockey players coming to play in the NHL. Right. And you think back to like 1980, the Miracle on Ice, Jim Craig and all those guys, that's kind of when guys started breaking into the NHL a little bit, was just after that. So it was a long journey, I think. But it wasn't like, I think maybe growing up in Canada might have been a little bit different because the NHL was just full of Canadian players. So it was a little bit different growing up, and it's certainly not like it is today.
Right. Yeah. I mean, because it gets quite, serious, I guess, for lack of a better word, earlier, with the aspirations being real and for some more real than others, and chasing that NHL dream. In some ways unhealthily, right? So it sounds like your introduction and your participation in it was pretty holistic. You were an athlete growing up. You were playing hockey. You found that you were good at it. At some point, you had to make a decision that that's what you wanted to play. But it was more with the goals and aspirations of maybe being a D1 college player.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess ironically, I ended up leaving high school a year early and going to play major junior when I was
right. So walk us through that. How did that transpire?
It's a long story. I'll try to shorten it, but in a nutshell, I finished my junior year of high school. I was playing at Mount St. Charles, which was a big hockey school in Rhode Island, and New England high school hockey was very high level back then. There are a lot of guys, around that time and before that came out of Massachusetts, Rhode Island, prep school, high school hockey. Went on to play college and then NHL, but it was, you couldn't compare the high school hockey to major junior hockey. It was certainly a big jump. And as I said, my goals, my dreams were to play college hockey pretty much up until then. And I went to the U.S. junior camp in the summer, which happened to be in Lake Placid. And I was there for 3 or 4 days, I think. Ended up from there, a family friend asked if I wanted to go to skate in the Cornwall Royals camp for 2 days. Back then, they had the 48-hour rule, and if you stayed longer than 48 hours, if you went to a camp for more than 48 hours, you lost your college eligibility, whether you were Canadian or American, it didn't matter. And so I went up and I skated in 4 scrimmages, and they offered me a contract that would have subsidized part of my college if I didn't sign an NHL contract. And we went home for a week, and I talked about it with my dad and my brother for the better part of that week. And within a week, I said, I'm going to go. And that was really it. I think, it's easy to look back and go, everything worked out, and, 2020 hindsight. But, I've said this probably throughout my career. I missed out on that college experience. I wish I went to college. If not for anything more than, all the guys that I played with that went to college, they had kind of their alma mater, their built-in group of friends or network, so to speak, whether it's people helping them out financially or, agents or across the board. They just had a tight-knit group of friends that I feel like I kind of missed out on. I still keep in touch with a couple guys from junior, but, not nearly the extent to what the college experience was.
Yeah, interesting, because I've kind of wondered that myself too. You have your path and you take the path. Out here in the West, it was an option for sure. Like I played with Paul Correa as a 15-year-old when he was moving on to Maine, BC Junior. So there were some guys moving, like higher profile players, but from out here, there wasn't that many, right? Going the route was CHL, and for us, the Western League, and I made that decision. And And then in hindsight, for me, obviously we had vastly different careers. I was wondering, like, geez, I wonder what would have happened, right? Like if I would have went that other way, how would that have worked out? Who knows, right? Because it definitely became much more mainstream for guys to be coming out of NCAA and coming and stepping into the NHL from there. Even guys that were undrafted and coming out as free agents, right? That happened a lot more too.
Yeah.
But yeah, so but I have that great experience of having the 4 years in Spokane, and for me, like being all over the place in my pro career, that for me is my fraternity, right? Like the guys from there are the guys that I talk to really the most, that have the closest connections with. So I can totally see where you're coming from with that, especially being from the States. I can imagine that would be something. Well, how do you feel about the whole? What sounds like it's happening. It's just a matter of when. Like the CHL is going to be able to come and play in NCAA and receive scholarships to play. How do you feel that is going to do to the hockey landscape?
Well, I think that there's so many unknowns of what's going to happen. But in the end, I think it's great for players in the sense that there's going to be more options. And as a player, obviously, I wish I didn't have to make that decision when I was 17 years old, that I went there and I lost my college eligibility. Mm-hmm. Now, would I have gone to college? I don't know. Maybe I would have, maybe I wouldn't have. But at the same time, to have that option, have that ability, it just, it never made sense. And as someone that gave up that opportunity, I always, thought that was wrong. It's wrong to force kids that young. So I think, and from that sense, it's really good. I guess the most interesting thing from my perspective, Pat LaFontaine is working for the league. He's still working for the league. He works for the Emergency Assistance Fund mainly now, but Bill Daly had brought him in, and it was about a 2-year project. And Patty brought in all the different stakeholders, I would say, in hockey. So he brought, USHL, the CHL, all three of the commissioners from the OHL, WHL, Quebec League, had the NCAA, USA Hockey, Hockey Canada. Even at certain points, people from the IIHF came in to a couple of the meetings. He had guys like Cam Neely and Luc Robitaille, and it was really to try to. He had a couple goals. One, he wanted to raise draft age, which I'm in complete agreement with. I think an 18-year-old draft. It's just there's so many challenges for an 18-year-old kid. I played a couple games as an 18-year-old. It's just forget the on-ice stuff. The physical nature and of the game. It's a little different today, but you're a boy playing amongst men, and that's one thing. But the mental aspect, I think, is extremely challenging. And you think about, going from a 17-year-old to an 18-year-old, living on your own, playing in the NHL. It's just another. Buying another year or two wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So I didn't mean to get sidetracked there, but Patty wanted to raise draft age. He wanted to open up the NCAA to major junior players, basically create a pathway that players could see more clearly than you see today. You look at other sports. There are clear pathways from, youth sports up through high school, up through college to professional levels. Soccer may be the other outlier, but, it's hockey's challenging that way. So Patty was trying to bring all the stakeholders together and get some agreements on these different things. And we started to get pretty close to achieving some of the goals that Patty wanted to. And I actually started to get scared when we were getting close, because you're thinking, what are the unknowns? What's going to happen when we open that up? And when you look, it's ballpark, you got 60 major junior teams across Canada. You got 60 some odd D1 programs in the United States. So, you have 120 teams where kids of that age can kind of land and then move on to the pro level. Do you do you now just create a pathway where they're going to go major, those same, however many kids there are going to go major, junior, and then they're going to go to college? Are they going to take up all the air in the room, basically? And instead of creating more opportunities for players, does it potentially just tighten the funnel at the top, which is what Patty used to talk about, how everybody kind of gets bottlenecked and kids start quitting the game at 15, 16, 17 years old because there's just no hope of them playing at the higher level, which is what we were seeing. So but in the end, I think one, we do need more programs. You need, and before we hopped on, we were talking a little bit about potential junior hockey expansion in the United States. I think you're gonna see expansion of junior hockey. I think you're gonna see expansion of NCAA programs over the next several years. So I really think it's going to be good for the game overall. But you see what's happening with the NIL name, image, likeness deals, and what's the portal, for college football and college basketball especially. It's craziness. It's the Wild West, and it's going to take time for it to get sorted out. In the end, for hockey, for this specifically, I think it's going to be good.
Yeah, so I love this conversation. Like, what are the good? Like, what do you think is the best thing about it?
I mean, there's just extremely high levels of hockey, and I think right now a lot of kids that are very talented, very skilled, have been getting pushed out of the game because there just aren't enough spots for them to land. I think that it's going to keep more kids in the game longer, giving them, a better opportunity to maybe realize their dream of playing professional hockey one day, whether it's in the NHL, the American League, or overseas, wherever it might be. I think it just contributes to the growth of the game.
Does it hurt Canadian youth sports, do you think?
I don't think it will. I think, again, there's some interesting things happening in Canada, though, or there were anyway. I don't have access to the latest stats, but I know, just even a few years ago, you're looking at hockey having real competition over the last decade in Canada for, kids participating in sports, whether it's baseball or basketball or soccer. We talked about all the new Canadians coming in from different countries, and hockey wasn't necessarily what they were going to be gravitating to. You also had, Canadian players being very successful in the NBA and Major League Baseball, and that becoming, an aspiration for other young Canadian kids. So you started to see more competition for kids at young ages that didn't always exist in Canada. It was always assumed that, oh, you're Canadian, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get a hockey stick in your hand. You're going to be playing street hockey. And, that was so I do think that, I think that, for the ability for kids to continue to play at higher levels and have more opportunities, more places for them to land, I think that's a good thing for the Canadian kids. The last thing that I'll say is, a lot of times in hockey in particular, and I think maybe I just don't understand the other paths in sports as well, but I feel like kids are forced to leave home generally at younger ages in hockey than they are in other sports. And I don't think that's a great thing. I left home as a 17-year-old. I think, the longer you can stay at home and under the guidance of your parents and things like that, I think that's a good thing. And I think, kids crossing the border, whether U.S. kids going to play junior hockey or Canadian kids coming down to the U.S. to play in the USHL to save their college eligibility, I think you're going to keep more kids at home longer, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Personally.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it might get older. Like I'm speculating potentially, like the league might get older.
Yeah.
Meaning the CHL, the BCHL here when they left Hockey Canada, it's definitely gotten older. Like it's been less developmental, let's say, and more of a 19-year-old league. So I'm wondering what's going to happen with that landscape. You talk about the NHL draft. The WHL draft is a 14-year-old draft, which is crazy.
Yeah.
Is that gonna change? Does it make the WHL stronger or the CHL stronger in general, right? Because now, most of the best players are there anyways, but is now all the best players going to go there because they still have the option of going NCAA, right? Like it's definitely an interesting landscape right now. And, who knows where it's going to go. But to your point, I think the more options, the better. And for me, we were both in the same boat. I had to decide at 15 years old, whether I was going to play major, junior, or whether I was going to take university off the table. I mean, that's an unfair decision to have to make at that age. So, if that gets changed, I think just from the basis, the baseline of the philosophy of it, I think they're getting it right. And then whatever happens from there, I guess happens. You mentioned the mental challenges of the draft. You were somebody that went to Cornwall, was drafted out of Cornwall, in NHL as an NHL third rounder, I believe, dealing with that whole experience, that whole crossing a border, leaving home, playing Canadian junior hockey, being exposed to the NHL draft, getting drafted. How do you feel that you handled the mental challenges of that, going back to that time?
Yeah. I think when I look back, I feel like I was extremely fortunate to be drafted by Montreal. The organization back then, top to bottom, was just amazing. And I think from the coaching staff to the scouts, and I was an hour from Montreal. When I was playing in Cornwall, I was very close, and Claude Roel was actually a former coach of the Canadiens, famous scout for years and years. He used to come down to see me probably a couple times a month. And, my first year I had stayed up, I played 4 games, and then I got sent back to junior. I was expecting to potentially stay up as a 19-year-old, and that didn't happen. I got sent back right away. I didn't play any games. And you go through really big emotional swings, ups and downs through your career. There was times where I was getting in my car and I was going to drive home to Rhode Island. I wanted to quit, and it's just you're just very, it's there are personal challenges that everybody faces differently and at different times in their career. But I look back, all of that kind of contributed to who I was, particularly the second half of my career, I think. Because I was on a roller coaster. I think I could probably say I was on a roller coaster throughout my entire career. But it was, every obstacle you face makes you a stronger person. The experience makes you better, smarter, and it's like anything else, But there are, there's so few people that can relate to it or that go through it. So being in an organization like Montreal, really, would I wanted to play in the league as an 18-year-old, 19-year-old? Absolutely. Was I ready? Probably not. And they brought me in and taught me how to be a professional. And so I don't know if that would have been the case if I was drafted by the Pittsburgh Penguins back then, or another team that wasn't necessarily the Montreal Canadiens or had the staff that they had.
Right. Yeah, that conversation comes up so often, especially in the line of work that I'm doing right now. The place that drafts you really does matter, and even like where you go to as a junior matters. Like there's so many things that are wrapped around opportunity, that are wrapped around the infrastructure of the team, the culture there. All those things that are paramount in your path. And in your personal pathway, and how that works out for you. And obviously there's lots of things that aren't in our control with that. And we need to make the best of our, of whatever opportunity we have. But we're not being fair to the system if we're discounting that aspect. That you mentioned, right?
No, for sure. I had a close friend, former American player who's actually I'm not going to name names, but he was he had a really really good NHL career, and his son who's playing right now, he's up and down between the minors and the NHL. But he was a 4-year undrafted college player, and he was pretty. I don't want to say he had his pick of where he could sign coming out, but he had options. There was no question about it. And I spent probably an hour or two on the phone with his dad talking about different opportunities that he had. And that the one thing that I really stressed to him was, put the money aside, and you have to be in an organization where he's going to be able to thrive and develop. What is it? And he happened to be a defenseman. I said, who's coaching the defense? What are the type of things that they're saying? How are they going to, they look at him as a player that's going to develop over time, or they think they're going to stick him in the lineup right away? And so do you want to be on a team that's in the bottom third of the league for the last 3 years, or do what opportunities are there? And so it's really, it really is challenging though, because, he was in a situation where, you have the rookie caps and everything like that. So the money's going to be fairly similar across the board, but he ended up going to an organization that was struggling. And, within 2 years, he was out of there and he was in another organization, and his self-confidence was dropping. And, that development, that ability for teams to develop players, and there are a lot of good ones now. There's a lot of, it wasn't necessarily the case back, in the late 80s and early 90s, but there are a lot of good teams that do develop players and have a lot of knowledge today that they never had in the past. So taking all those things into consideration, if you have that opportunity and you're not drafted, it's just different things to think about, different ways of thinking about things.
Yeah. Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, think about the San Jose Sharks right now, like just for instance, right? Like they aren't really an NHL team. So the players on that team, it's funny, right? They're in the same league, but it's not really the same league. Right? So you're getting opportunities in that environment that other guys might not have. Some guys are going to thrive there. Maybe they're, in another organization, they wouldn't be in the NHL at that point, right? They'd be in the minors working on their craft. Some guys rise to that challenge, and some guys end up making it work. And some guys, when they get thrown in like that, it doesn't work out for them. It was too early. It was too soon, right? So you can't really paint it with a broad brush. I don't think that one is right for the other, but it is amazing, like the amount of opportunity that you will get generally on a team that is lower in the standings, right? Than trying to make the Tampa Bay Lightning roster for the last 5 years in a row. It's a little bit harder as a young guy, no matter how good you are. So yeah, it's those are great questions though, and to find out where it was. I mean, I even noticed that in my brief time with different teams across the NHL, and I'm sure you saw it too, walking into the Montreal Canadiens. That was the creme de la creme at the time. I mean, they oozed tradition and excellence, right? Like I remember Brent Gilchrist saying, like from the guy who would take you to your seat, like it was all about winning. Everything was class. Everything was taken care of. And then, you go around the league and it's definitely not like that everywhere.
Yeah, no question about that.
Right? Isn't that nuts? I mean, but from the outside looking in, the casual fan or the casual player, I mean, the NHL is the NHL, but it's vastly different experiences depending on where you're at.
Yeah, no, absolutely. 100%. I think things are different today. I think, you go in any NHL room and just to be competitive, like if you want to attract free agents one day, if you want to, you have to keep up with the Joneses, and it's, they're I think all the NHL.
Take a short break from my conversation with Mr. Schneider to remind you that if you are listening to this podcast, you have interest in performance, I assume, and high performance at that. And you have found value, I'm sure, in the mental side of the game. It comes up over and over again in the podcast. It is without question the greatest competitive advantage you can have as a player. And What does Up My Hockey do? What is it all about? Well, it's about providing you with that mental advantage with a program that is tailor-made for hockey players to be able to reach their potential, which is why I called it the Peak Potential Hockey Project. Now, if you are interested at all about mindset and you would like to dip your toe in, at least to see where you sit, I have developed a mindset quiz, which is available on my website, www.upmyhockey.com. It's in the top right portion of your screen. You click mindset quiz. It takes you maybe 5 minutes to respond to the questions. It will give you an idea about how mindset can impact your game, the different areas where how you think and perceive can show up to your benefit or to your detriment. When you complete the quiz, you will get a letter grade. How good or how poorly is your mindset at this moment in your career? And after you press submit and you get that letter grade, I will also see your responses. And it'll give us an opportunity to potentially discuss what your mindset program could or should look like. Should you be involved in the Peak Potential Hockey Project? Or do you think it's best that you continue on the same path that you were on? I highly recommend players work on their confidence. I highly recommend they work on their ability to self-assess. Their confidence is coming from their empowerment. And that's what I do, is we give you tools to be empowered, to make new choices in new situations, to rethink the game in a way that is advantageous for you, to push the envelope, to double down on your skill development, and to be an amazing teammate and contributor on the ice consistently. Does that sound good? I think it does. So why not take the mindset quiz and see if you will work with me in a Peak Potential Hockey Project, either in a group capacity called my guided mission or as a mentored mission where it is just you and me one-on-one crafting a game plan for you and your ultimate playing potential. Now let's get back to the conversation with Mathieu Schneider. Yeah, I'm going to go back to when you said there was times that you were going to drive back to Rhode Island. Like those are those decisive, turning points in somebody's career, because there are some guys that do drive home, and we all know those guys, right? That they do leave.
Yeah.
Do you remember any reason, like what made Mathieu Schneider stay in one of those scenarios? What was the difference that made you not drive the car out of the country and stay and stick it out? Do you remember any informative moments?
Oh, I mean, there was one time in particular, Serge Savard was the GM in Montreal at the time, and he called me. I was like, I'm going home. I quit. I was in my car, and I think I got about 2 hours, and then I turned around. I'm like, yeah. It was, it's just, I had a fight with my coach, and I don't remember what the fight was over. We had a really good relationship. And for some reason we ended up getting into a fight, which became a pattern over the rest of my career. I fought with all my coaches, but that was, and Serge called me and he was, and just kind of, what's the issue? And in the end, he's talked me down and I'm like, yeah, it was ridiculous. I don't know what I was thinking in it, but it's just have a harder time controlling your emotions. I think as a young man, I think was the challenge, and to my reaction to criticism, whether I thought it was justified or not justified or whatever the case might be. And, I think at the time too, it was a combination of factors where, I was probably thinking, I shouldn't be here anyway. I should be playing in the NHL. And if I'm not in the NHL, I don't want to play, and, things like that. So it was, thinking back, it's completely unreasonable, the way I was thinking. But, I look at, my oldest son now is 23. My younger son is 20. And, I look at them and they make unreasonable decisions all the time, right? So yeah, you're just the stakes are higher. You're at a different level when you're on the cusp there, and trying to make it.
I think that, I'm listening to you through the lens and with the ears of what I'm doing now, right? And helping players. One of the things is, manage those emotions. And so I'm listening to you talk about, a 19, 20-year-old kid who is a kid who is playing on a big stage, who has big things at stake, that still has a 19-year-old brain, right?
Yeah.
And without the parents and stuff. And I can't help but think too. So you're like a third round pick. You're somebody that's on the prospect depth chart. You're somebody that they want, like they've invested in, that they want to play for them one day. Like your rope is a little bit longer than maybe the other guy that has that same reaction.
Yeah.
And see you later. You're
Yeah.
gone, right?
Yeah.
Like in
No
that
question.
moment. Like how important do you think it is, like that emotional regulation when it comes to being a pro or even on the journey?
Oh, I think that's everything. I mean, put sports aside. I think, it's one of the I think it's one of the most important qualities or assets that any individual can have, is to really, keep your emotions in check, not make emotional decisions. And that later on in my career, you want to be kind of a flat line, right? You don't want to be, when things are going really well, it's easy to get really high. A lot of those guys that get really high after, one good game or two good games fall into the trap of getting really low and spiraling when you have a couple of bad games. We used to joke about you can't read the newspapers. Now, kids today have social media. It makes things so much more challenging. It's so much more difficult. Just to pick up the phone in between periods or something. If you had a bad period or you turn the puck over, it costs a goal or things like that. How do you turn that off? It's a skill, and it's it's something that you have to you get the opportunity to learn it just through time, right?
Yeah.
Because if you don't, you're gone pretty quickly. If every time you make a mistake, your game spirals and you keep getting worse and you're feeling bad for yourself and you're down and you're not playing as well, you're going to be gone pretty quickly. There's just not that room for error. And it's at all the higher levels. It's at the NCAA, it's in major junior, it's in, heck, it's, we talk about 12-year-olds. The 12-year-old kids today, you go to the GTHL in Toronto and, kids are getting benched for making a bad pass because the coach wants to win the championship that year, and it's ridiculous. So, but I think that it's just a required skill to have that, mental toughness. No matter what happens, I'm here, right? I can't get here, and I can't get down too low. I can't get too high. I can't get down too low, and I think that's huge.
I like that you say that, as it is a skill. It's one thing that I think reframing that to people, whether it be the parents that are listening or to the athletes, that this isn't something that you either have necessarily or don't have necessarily. It's something that if you want to focus on and provide intention to it, that you can get better at it. And it's actually in your best interest to consciously try to get better at it. Because if you don't, it might be too late, to your point, right? Like we don't necessarily have endless amounts of time, especially with the short window of trying to develop a hockey career, to figure it out and get it figured out, So take the opportunities, let yourself recognize that this is something that I can get better at, that I can consciously improve, on an accelerated rate, and you're definitely gonna give yourself a better chance of making things happen. So I like that skill word, right? The skill word is a good word.
Yeah, for sure. I had just on a side note, our families had the absolute pleasure and honor of hosting a woman volleyball player at our house in California for the better part of the last 5 or 6 years, I guess. I lose track of time through the pandemic, but Melissa Humana Paradis, she's actually BC. She lives out in BC now with her boyfriend. But she won silver. Her and her partner, they won silver in Paris this past Olympics, beach volleyball. And when you look at individual sports versus team sports, it becomes just so much more important. and I look at the beach volleyball, the pairs. It's not an individual sport, but it's not a team. Like you're watching the World Series, and I I felt bad for Otani. He wasn't hitting in the World Series, but the rest of his team was playing unbelievable, and they go on and win a championship. Unfortunately for Judge, it didn't work out the same way. But when you look at a team sport like hockey, baseball, football, if one or two guys are having a bad night, the rest of the team can pick you up. In an individual sport, or a tandem sport like beach volleyball, you cannot afford to feel sorry for yourself after a bad point, after a missed shot, after any of those things for 2 seconds, because the set's gone and you lose a set, and there's your opportunity. It's such a short window. I think those athletes are I think they're even more resilient than the team guys. And it's really incredible to see how Melissa, they used to call her the silent assassin, but you watch her play and it's just the same all the way through. And it really is incredible. But, I said skill, maybe I said it accidentally, you're using it, but it is a skill that doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah. Yeah, and you talk about those fluctuations. When I'm talking to the athletes about mental toughness, or I call actually mental agility, is that the people you're talking about, like the golfers, the tennis players, like where it's like full on display. You can't check out for a hole in golf, you've lost a tournament. You can't check out for a set or for a game in tennis, you've lost, right? I always say that like those players are humans. Like stuff goes wrong. They feel bad at times, but their ability to close the gap on whatever that is, that event, becomes like microseconds. It's done, it's over, and then it's on to the next thing. It's done, it's over, it's on to the next thing. Whereas a hockey player does have a much more there's more ability for a hockey player to sit on the bench, recover, right? Like there's longer windows that we're dealing with there when it comes to that resiliency and the ability to close the gap. But it's on full display. People just get better at it than others. I do think that's a thing, and you see that even grow through the careers of golfers and tennis players. You watch them develop that over time, where they get better at it. It's pretty neat. With you and going back to the start of your career, I like that you started in the AHL and ended in the AHL, or at least had an experience with it in the AHL. Obviously close to my heart. Like I think that, with me being a guy that was up and down and, riding the buses and trying to make it, there's something to be said, I believe, for that route, and for at least that experience. What can you say about your time in the AHL there? And did it give you any type of perspective for what was going to happen for the rest of your career?
Yeah, I think the AHL has really, and as you just mentioned, I was back in the AHL towards the end of my career due to a fight with my coach again, with Alain Vigneault. But it was, it changed so much. I think when I first came up, it was just starting to become more of a developmental league rather than kind of, I would say, you had a mix of a lot of older players. When I say, older, you had guys that were, in their late 20s, pushing 30, that were in the American League. And that those were like, your top goal scorers and sometimes your enforcers. But, generally the American League was, I think it was older back then. I never looked at the numbers, but when you look at the American League today, I think, you got maybe 2 or 3 veterans on the team, but you got a very young roster, and you're strictly trying to develop. It was, it wasn't the same. But again, I go back to the organization at the time, and I had a great coach when I got sent down to Sherbrooke in the American League. I just had a tremendous coach that was, he was a defenseman as well. And, it goes back to, he taught me how to play defense. Playing defense in the NHL is much different than playing defense or it was back then anyway. I think it's a lot closer today. When you look at college hockey or junior hockey, I feel like the jump from college or junior is not quite as big as it used to be. Back when I came into the league, and even throughout a lot of the '90s. But um, the development side of the American League for me was it was important. It was just another piece to the puzzle that kind of allowed me or gave me the opportunity to have a long career. So at the end of my career, it was literally I got into a fight with Vigneault, and Mike Gillis was the GM, who was actually my former agent when before he became the president and GM of Vancouver. And he's like, "Oh, I'll try to trade you, but you got to go down to Manitoba." I was like, "All right." I went down to Manitoba for a couple of weeks when that was it. So, but no, it was it was really I thought the game itself and I was Manitoba was an independent team, and they had gone to the Calder finals the year before, but they were just decimated with injuries. And that, I mean, we had guys in that team that had trouble catching a pass, literally. So it was I think we won one game. I played about 6 or 7 games there. I think we won one of them, and we probably shouldn't have won that one either. But it was that was a little challenging. I'm breaking out from behind my net, and I'm looking at our guys at the far blue line waiting for passes. It was I felt like I was in a different world. But my two experiences were polar opposites of being in the minors.
There you go. Yeah, I mean the perspective is nice though too. Like I think, mind you, actually maybe we should go on that because you did play NHL games this season before. You mentioned that you kind of in your head thought that you should be in the NHL. I mean, a lot of guys do, right? That you were there, maybe were successful, and then now you start your pro career in the minors. Was there any issue at all with playing where your feet were or where your skates were, as I like to say, like being in that moment, or were you kind of out of your head?
I wasn't really thrilled about it. I wasn't happy about it. We had some great players down there. I'm trying to think now. Lyle Odeline was down there. He ended up being my partner in the NHL for a while.
Lots
too.
of NHLers. I'm looking at the list right now.
Yeah,
Stefan Richer was there.
Yeah,
Andrew Castles, Benoit Brunet, Mark Peterson.
Yeah. Oh, we had some great players down there. So that certainly made it easier. But I think that year Montreal they kept 9 defensemen up, and I was 10th. They had sent me down, and I actually had a call into my agent. I had a call into Surge. We were asking for a trade. If I'm not gonna, you got 9 defensemen up. Where am I on total ball? And I felt like I could play. They ended up getting 4 injuries. 4 guys got hurt, and I got called up. It was early December. I got called up, and I played my first 2 or 3 games. Pat Burns was the coach, and I stayed. After that, I stayed in the lineup, and I never looked back after that. But it was challenging for sure. Having great teammates, having a great coach down in Sherbrooke was certainly wonderful. But I thought I was ready to play, and I was, and so it just worked out. It was another one of those things like it could have worked out where they traded me too. If 4 guys don't get hurt on defense, which was incredible when I look back and think about it, I could have ended up somewhere else easily too.
Yeah, no kidding. Or maybe not traded and playing the whole year in the AHL and rattled the
absolutely.
whole time, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
You never know. So that's cool. Yes, you got up and started to play, and then shit, man, 1,300 games later, and a cup in your 3rd year. Like, was that? I mean, I would assume that's still the pinnacle. Like, was that the best experience as a hockey player for you?
Yeah, that was amazing. I guess my only regret is that I was so young when I won it. I was 23. I thought, I'm going to win it a few more times. You never. And, that was it. But having having won it in Montreal was just incredible, obviously being there. And, the group of guys that we had were incredible. We just had our 30th reunion last year in Montreal, which was a lot of fun. Yeah. And so, I think if I had to pick one spot that I was going to win it, looking back over the course of my career, Montreal was the place. And, I wish, like I said, I wish I was older and I would have enjoyed it and appreciated it a lot more, because everybody that plays in the NHL should get the opportunity to lift that cup. You get there. It's just there's not a feeling like it in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did it make it even somehow more special that it was against Greta and the Kings?
Yeah. Again, you look at how, destiny or fate or whatever the case might be. And I remember, so you go back a couple series through that whole playoff run. I got hurt in the first round. We were playing Quebec. Quebec had a great team. Sakic, Sundin was there. Hextall was their goalie. They were up 2-0. Guys were getting ready to book their summer vacations. We were thinking, this is going to be a tough one to bounce back from. And then all of a sudden, we won 4 straight. We played Buffalo, beat them 4 straight. And we're watching the Islanders Pittsburgh series, and Pittsburgh was just off the charts, right? They won 91, they won 92. Mario in the height of it, and the Islanders knock him off in Game 7. They're like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. The Islanders had a great team too. I mean, but Pittsburgh was just, they were incredible. So we got lucky there. We played the Islanders. We had a good series against the Islanders. We get through that. And, we're watching Gretz, and we're watching the Toronto LA series, and Toronto had an unbelievable team back then too. Like thinking of Gilmore and Clark right in the prime of their career. Andrew, I mean, they were really good. But the difference between them and LA for us, I think, was they were a big, heavy, tough team in Toronto. And LA was more of a skill, finesse. They had some toughness. There's no question about it. But I think I say this begrudgingly, but I feel like if we would have had to play Toronto that year, I feel like Toronto would have beat us. I don't know if we had, they were just a heavy team, And then in the finals, we end up winning the second game in overtime. And my poor Marty McSorley, man, I'm friends with him to this day, and I still feel bad for him about it. But his illegal stick gets called, and we end up tying it. And Eric Desjardins had a hat trick, unbelievable game. So, but you look at all those things and how they lined up, 10 overtimes. Patrick Roy just stood on his head night in and night out. He was unbelievable. All the things that just kind of fall into place, but. That wasn't it. We were out of the 16 teams that made the playoffs that year. You probably would have had us about 15 or 16 on the odds to win it. We lost. I think we lost like 8 of our last 10 games going into the playoffs that year too. But
wow,
it was a wild season.
That's so fun. Yeah, things got to go right. And that's the thing. Like I completely. Embrace and support like the celebration of champions, but I think that the media overdoes like the difference between getting to the final and losing and getting to the final and winning. Like, they've both teams have figured it out. I think, one team for whatever reason, comedy of errors, luck, the circumstances, whatever the case may be, something pushes them over the edge, which is amazing. Yeah. And when you get to do it, it is so special. But even getting to the semifinals at that level, like you have to do so many things right, and you have to come together as a team in so many ways, and overcome so much adversity that it's I just think it's bad in the Hall of Fame kind of discussion and these types of things. Well, did you ever win? Well, holy smokes, there's so many things that have to go right, for that to happen, right? Yeah. That it's tough to put that on one player and that they were some type of a failure because they weren't able to accomplish it, right?
Yeah. No, it's I mean, hockey more than any other sport, it's a true team effort. You cannot win a championship with 12 guys, even with 15 guys. You need your third line to pitch in. You need your 5-6D to pitch in. You need, when guys get hurt, you need guys that are, the 22nd, 23rd guy. You need them to step in and play at the highest level possible. You need your goaltender to stand on his head every night. And you need to do that for 2 months straight, right? And so it truly is. I look at basketball, and I feel like, maybe I just don't know enough about basketball. I feel like you can win with 3 or 4 great players. You can win a basketball championship, and teams have done it. And hockey, that's not the case, right? You need everybody peaking at the same time.
Wasn't that what makes it so frickin' beautiful?
Yeah, no, it is.
Right?
That's at every level too, though. That's major, junior. I think Memorial Cup. I mean, that's incredible. NCAA, same thing. It's all that's hockey.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And when you get it right and you feel it, like you with all the teams you played on, like there's just something about that culture that is different. I mean, guys care about each other in a different way. Guys are valued in a different way. From top to bottom, there's a different vibe about that, and it's so special when you got it, and you just can't undo it once you've seen it too, right? Yeah. Like it's a difference maker. What with as far as you and just from an individual, I was looking you up a little bit before. I try not to look too deep, to be completely honest, because I think that's where the authenticity of the conversation maybe fades. But like some really cool highlights, one being led the NHL in points of the defenseman, in goals another season. Like those are high accolades. Like how was that from a mental side of it? One, like being an NHLer, it sounds like you had quite a bit of belief in yourself from a young age that you thought you were good enough to be there and should be there. At what point did your belief system allow you to be one of the best in the game, and in a couple of scenarios, the best at your position in the game?
Yeah, I think, there were different opportunities that I had throughout my career that were really, I guess the first one I would say was when Jacques Demers came in when he replaced Pat Burns. And when Pat was there, and the defensive, the whole system was a very defensive system. We used to play the neutral zone trap, right? And they didn't want defensemen jumping up into the rush unless we were going to create an outnumbered rush. We were really like, they had the D, holding us back all the time. Really felt that, our job was defense first. And in all honesty, that allowed me, I think, to be able to play as long as I did, because that, defense was always the first responsibility. I had that in my mind. I wasn't going to take unnecessary risk, and that was something that was ingrained in us, all of us in Montreal, defense that were playing there. But when Jacques came in, Jacques kind of took the handcuffs off of me, and he said, "Go! I want you to go and create offense." And that's what I was in junior. I was an offensive defenseman. And so but I didn't have that defensive side of my game. I couldn't contain guys in the corner and until they really taught me. And so, as on one hand, it was great. On the other hand, I missed the offensive side of stuff. And Jacques really kind of brought that out of me again. And I started to produce some more points, some more goals. I think, the other thing is my shot. I always had a pretty good shot, but I worked on my shots so much with all the other one-timers, things like that, getting pucks through to the net, number one. But that just became a big weapon for me. And I think, a lot of my points came off, one-timer slap shots, or, assists, rebound assists, and things like that. So I think as my shot got better over the course of my career. That led to a lot of my points. And then, in Detroit, I had some good years, and I think that a lot of that, you credit to the guys that were around me, not around me, that I was around.
Yeah.
When I think about that, I got to Detroit, and what was it, 2001 or two? No, sorry, no, it wasn't two. It was 2003. Sorry, 2003. I got to Detroit. There were 11 Hall of Famers on that team. Pavel Datsyuk and Henrik Zetterberg were alternating fourth line centers. The fourth line was Robitaille, Larionov, and either Zetterberg or Datsyuk. That was the fourth line when I got there, and it was just, I mean, you go up and down that roster, it was crazy, and so to have the ability to play with those guys in that lineup was, I mean, that was just so much fun playing there in Detroit with those guys. And the game felt easy. Every night you went out, you looked forward. You knew you went out there every single night thinking you're going to win. And I don't think there was another team that I ever played on where I felt that way. I mean, I felt the opposite a couple of years when I was with the Atlanta Thrashers one year. That was a grind. But to feel like, I mean, you should win every single night that you got to step on the ice. That was just incredible. So that was a lot of fun. But playing with those guys, and then the other aspect of it in Detroit that I got there as a 31-year-old. I had gotten traded from LA, and I think I was the second oldest guy on the team in LA, and I got traded to Detroit, and I was like, I think 11th or 12th oldest on the team. But the thing that amazed me, I always had this preconception that you get to the NHL, you got a set of skills. Could you get better at goal scoring? Yeah, maybe a little bit. Could you get better you could get better at certain things, but those guys, when I think of Yzerman, Shanahan, Robitaille, you just go down the list of the players there. They were such students of the game, and they were talking about goal scoring and other goalies' weaknesses that I never heard ever before in my career. And I'm thinking, I played over 10 years already, and I haven't seen this, and I played on several teams. It was just amazing to me the way they thought about offense and creating it and goal scoring. I just hadn't seen it, and it made me better. There's no question about it. Brett Hull, like his whole philosophy, it made complete sense when he said it to me, but you're watching him score goals, picking corners here and there, and he's like, I'm not picking corners. He goes, I'm shooting up or down, left or right. That's it. There's 4 quadrants, and I'm just trying to hit the net, and that's it, up or down, left or right. I'm like, that makes complete sense. And he's just shooting. He's a shooter. So,
Yeah.
when you start to think about the game differently, and guys are sharing those type of insights, it just made everybody better. And you look at that, you look at how that team over those years, and even still, I'm sure Stevie still has the same, mentality as a general manager. That's why Tampa is so successful too. But
Yeah.
just that idea that you keep learning from one another, as teammates is incredible. And I hadn't experienced that really until I got there. And it was just such a great time, great team, great guys. But yeah.
That's amazing. That whole concept essentially is growth mindset versus fixed mindset, which is something that I've studied quite extensively since getting out of the game. And it's been an absolute game changer for me on a personal level, like to understand that. Because to your point, it shows up in so many different ways just in life. But if you can incorporate that growth mindset philosophy strategy into your sports, into your team, into the idea of what you guys want to become, like, it's a game changer, because as an NHLer, you're right. A lot of the guys that were there, like you're the best players in the world. Like there was no skill development back in the 90s and the 2000s. There was no skill development guy, right?
Yeah.
If you weren't playing in the lineup, you'd stay after and you'd work on stuff with whoever told you to work on stuff, but it wasn't necessarily ground into the players there. We were just trying to get through, play the next game, right? Play the next game. Now, if you get on that team that everyone's still trying to push and trying to get better, whether it's in the weight room or it's in practice or it's after, if it's before, like that's contagious. And you do actually get better. Like that's the other thing, like you improve.
Yeah.
So it's I mean, that's awesome that you were able to see that. And, you said 10 years into a career to see that and to see the impact that it can have. I mean, it speaks to that whole idea of, if you can adopt that early and choose that mindset, it's massively helpful. Take another short break from the conversation with Mathieu Schneider to remind coaches out there, if you want to be involved in the game as a job, whether you are coaching an academy, a youth team, a minor hockey team, if you have a passion for helping people succeed and grow and develop, maybe you can be the next Up My Hockey ambassador or affiliate. What that would mean is working with me side by side, essentially, with my programs to deliver them to your potential community, your geographic region, or even outside of that region on Zoom calls. I have no more room to handle the calls and to handle the clients and handle the teams that want to work on their mindset. This is a great way to expand your coaching expertise, to grow in an area of hockey that is being underserved right now, and with a reputable brand of Up My Hockey and myself. So if this sounds like something you'd be interested in, I have been receiving more calls and more inquiries about this recently, and it's exciting. So join. I can build a team, and I want to build a team, and it's an exciting time at Up My Hockey with the growth that is happening. So yes, do you check the box of hockey experience? Do you check the box of being a hockey coach or a hockey influencer? Do you have a hockey network in your area? Do you want to help players succeed? And do you want to be compensated for your help? If those are check boxes, then by all means reach out to me, Jason at upmyhockey.com, and we'll see if we're a good fit. I'm excited to receive your email, get it into me, and let's rock and roll. Now let's get back to the conversation with Mathieu Schneider. How good, I want to ask this question, because you as a D-man and a hell of a good D-man, played alongside Nick Lidstrom for 4 years. I would just love watching him play, from... I was able to play against him. So grateful for that. But just even from a video standpoint, to watch him, he was really, really compelling to me. Was he great to play with and to learn from?
Yeah, no, amazing. I mean, I think the first thing you hear whenever anybody asks someone that played with Nicky is say, great player, better human being. That's the what you hear consistently. And there just wasn't a weakness to his game, and he just kept getting better and better and better. Played with great players, but he made everybody around him better, and he's just an amazing guy. I mean, you can't say enough. You can't say enough about him. He was fortunate to be in that organization at that time, and with all those great players, but he was a huge part of creating that environment, that I described, just talking about everybody learning from one another. And if you didn't know anything about hockey and you met Nick Lidstrom, you would just like the guy. You'd want to just sit down and have coffee with him and go for beers. And
right.
He's just that type of person, right? And zero ego, right? It would never know in a million years he was the greatest defenseman of all time. So, I mean, I think there's probably no one that would think any differently than that of him, right, which is amazing, right?
That's super cool. Would you put him on that pedestal? Like you just
Oh,
said that. Was that exaggeration, or do you think he is the best?
no, no. I mean, when you look at the, I mean, you look at the different errors, uh, not errors, but eras,
Eras, yeah.
eras, ERA, uh, and the amount of the skill level, the physicality, the way the game has morphed over the years. I think he went probably similar to me. I think he started 89, 90 was my first year. I think he might have been 91, 92, or somewhere, maybe 92, 93. But you look at how the game changed over those 2 decades, from the 90s to 2000s, and it started to become less physical, more skill. I think back, there were defensemen when I first came in the league that had a hard time pivoting backward to frontward. 5, 6 defensemen that were just big guys that would just beat the heck out of you in front of the net in the corners. They just wear you down, and they'd hook and hold, and they'd cross check you. And it was a brutal game back then, and it started to get more and more skill. They took out a lot of the hooking and holding later on in the 90s, and different times the game got real. Players got really big and fast and strong. You think of guys like Lindros and Primo and John LeClaire, and you think of these big, and now the game is super fast every single night, and the skill levels through the roof. Every single player can pivot on a dime, and pick up the puck with a stick and throw it over his shoulder. I mean, it's crazy where it's gone from. But as you morph through it, like Nick had zero. There were zero weaknesses in his game. Like there was nothing that you could say. You couldn't beat him. You couldn't get around him. You probably couldn't beat him 2-on-1. Or you very rarely beat him 2-on-1. Making bad decisions with the puck. I think of all the different pizzas I threw up the middle that ended up in the back of our net. I don't ever remember Nick Lidstrom throwing a pizza up the middle of the ice. Maybe he did, and I just never. But just everything that he did, offensively, defensively, and then obviously his leadership ability. I never played with Bobby Orr, but Nick Lidstrom was the best from my 20 years, that's for sure.
Yeah. To be able to transfer it through all those decades and the different aspects of the game. He made everything look easy. That's the thing. Like when I talk to players about being competitive too, and some guys that maybe aren't overly physical, right? But sometimes players have a hard time understanding what that means from a competitive standpoint. I'm not a hitter. Well, watch Nick Lidstrom play defense. Like he would rarely hit anybody, but he'd always end up with the puck somehow.
Yeah.
Right. Like smarts and competitive in a different way. Right. Like he was just so cerebral. I loved the way he played the game, and it was fun to watch it. Maybe you can unpack the good teammate aspect though, because I love that as a conversation piece too. Does it boil down to having no ego? Because in this team environment that we just talked about, the success of a hockey team requires a group of individuals to give a shit about each other. Right. Yeah. And not everyone's going to love each other, but the value of being a good teammate does factor into that, and how that even happens. Can you describe, whether it's Nick Lidstrom or even in your mind, like what a good teammate looks like as a hockey player?
Yeah. Well, the dressing room in Detroit was really, it was so interesting. It was, I guess if I go back, I'll start by the first dressing room. When I went in, I played my first 4 games in Montreal. Bob Gainey was the captain there in Montreal. And back then, I think there was just such tremendous respect. Like he was, I don't know, it was almost like royalty. Like it felt like maybe it's the wrong word, but he was almost unapproachable to me. It was just like, and I was a rookie. Larry Robinson was on that team too. He was hurt. That's what kind of gave me my first break. He had broken his leg in the summer, and I stayed up a little bit. They were trying to fill a hole because they thought he was going to miss a big part of the season. But those two guys, I mean, they were, you're playing with, Hall of Famers, icons. I mean, it was just incredible. And that was, it was, I felt like a 5-year-old kid in that dressing room. So, and, that was how it was back then. I guess fast forward to Detroit where I was, and, again, I list off like all the Hall of Fame guys that were there, from, Stevie Y to Shanahan to Dominic Hasek and Brett Hull and Luc Robitaille and Larry Hanoff. I mean, it's just, and then, the younger guys. So, you're managing personalities, but there was a hierarchy in the sense that, Stevie Y was the leader in the dressing room. No questions, hands down, right? He had been there through all the tough times when, early in his career, and they built him to a winner through the 90s with Scotty Bowman coming there and everything. But Stevie was the guy. And if Stevie didn't say much in the dressing room, nobody else was really, right? Maybe Shanny a little bit. Brendan Shanahan was a little more vocal. He was a little strange. He had a lot of superstitions and stuff, Shanny. I used to mess with him with all the superstitions, but Stevie was the guy, right? And Nicky had the A on all the time too, but neither one of them were really very vocal. And it was a pretty quiet dressing room most of the time. Now, granted, things went well for a lot of the time we were there, but it was a pretty quiet dressing room, and it was real interesting because I had come from, there was a lot of rah-rah in a lot of dressing rooms that I played in on all my different teams. You always had a couple of guys that would get, really fired up, but everybody took their cue from Stevie. And if Stevie said something, everybody, whether it was Hully or Shanny or Nicky, Stevie talked, everybody just zip, and that's it. It was his dressing room. So they were real interesting, but at the same time, you came into that room and you were in line. I'm 31 years old, walking in that room for the first time, played against these guys for the last 10 years. Some of them I knew better than others from, Team USA and things like that I already played with them before. But no one was stepping out of line. And it was really incredible. And, that as long as Stevie was there, that was the case. And then that kind of got passed down when Stevie retired and Nicky became captain. That got passed down. And I imagine it was the same up until Nicky left. But, I guess that's not answering your question directly about, I think there's different ways to be a really good teammate, but in the end, it's caring about each other, right? It's caring about each other off the ice. If you don't like a guy off the ice, I guess you can fake it for a while, maybe, but and if things are going well on the ice, everything's good. But when things start to go sideways, if you got a guy that's really not a good person or only worried about his own stats or his own performance, not puts himself before the team, that gets flushed out pretty quickly at higher levels for sure, right? At junior college, NHL, AHL, that gets flushed out pretty quickly. And I think, it's difficult on a hockey team for sure. You can't thrive when you're that type of player.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things I try and say is, well, it separates, I think, great from good, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, is the ability to make other people better. And there's very few, Crosby comes to mind all the time. Like, anyone who plays with him is better, always, right? And not all superstars are like that in that magnitude. But if you can do that on the ice, I think there's also that feeling in the dressing room, because there is a comfort level, right? A value level. And I think there's some guys that have the ability to do that, to bring others up, instead of looking down or, making them feel bad about themselves in whatever way. It's that lifting of the boats, I think. And when guys are able to do that, especially guys that recognize and understand the power they have and the influence they have over the room. You mentioned Stevie there a ton of times. Like, I'm sure he was aware of the presence that he had. And, him talking to a young guy coming in that was on his first game or just joined the team, like the influence that can have coming from somebody like that is freaking mind blowing for that young guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you ever aware of that as you went through, consciously aware of, how your position changed and how maybe your contribution, your conversation, your willingness to maybe take some out for a dinner could have a big impact on them?
Oh, absolutely. In Montreal, that was ingrained in me. I think, you mentioned you had Brian Strudel on before your show. There was my rookie year, the year that I got called up from Montreal. Actually, sorry, this is I'm second year. It was my sophomore year. My second year, Pat Burns and I were getting into it a lot more. He was on me all the time. After he was great to me my first year, second year he was on me all the time. Like he was riding me. He I guess he didn't want me to get an ego. I'm not sure, but he was riding me all the time. And we were playing in Boston. We had several injuries. I think Carbo was our captain. He was out, and I think Screwy was probably the real veteran in the room. And we had a fairly young team. We certainly had a young defensive core. But Pat, I took a bad penalty at the end of the period, and I'm walking into the dressing room, and I go to put my helmet up in my stall, and Pat Burns beelines it to me, grabs me by the jersey, and puts me up against my stall, and I pushed him back against the Gatorade table, and then like the coaches jumped in and they brought Pat to the back, and I'm sitting there, I'm like hyperventilating. I'm going, what the heck just happened? I was 20 years old and I was sitting there. Pat Burns has me there. So, but Brian Screwy gets up and he goes right to the back and starts screaming at Burnsy, what the hell are you doing? What in the world will make it? And I was like, wow, like he's standing up for me. I'm like, and that was what, Brian Screwling, Guy Carbonneau, I think back, you mentioned Brent Gilchrist, those guys, Shane Corson, and I was there, guys that I really looked up to, that I admired, that were leaders in the dressing room. They stood up for me. And that was, to me, that was ingrained in me. That's one example, but there are a bunch of others. And Pat wasn't always throwing me up against the locker, but it was, those type of things, like that's what was part of who I was later on, trying to make sure that, maybe not in that drastic or black and white a situation, but, coach is riding a guy, he's having a bad week or, a few bad games, going over, just having that conversation with him. Hey, block it out. Or you know what you can do. You know the type of player you are. Back on track. One game, one period. And just those type of things from teammates go long way, right?
Yeah,
right?
Big time. Makes a big difference. Well, we catch you for an hour. I do want to. You mentioned it so many times, and it's a very real aspect of the game. So I want to finish with the coach altercations, because it just came up again. So you said that it kind of became a theme throughout your career. That battle, sometimes it depends on who's the bench boss, right? What their philosophy is. It all depends on the character and the personality of the player too, for how these things unravel. But there usually needs to be some level of communication. And sometimes we do have to stand up for ourselves as players, right? Some are more akin to it than others. Some people do it in different ways. Just talk about like your experience with that, and I don't even know where to lead you with that, but like you obviously weren't scared of the altercation, is there anything you learned about that through your career? Any advice you'd have to players about how to approach coaches? Like, I don't know, like you take the lead on that, but it's definitely a real part of being a hockey player.
Yeah, no, it is. I'm not sure I would advise kids or players to to do it. That's looking back. It's probably a big reason why I played on 10 different teams over the course of my career.
Yeah.
But in the end, it was there were situations that I was in. Whether it's New York Islanders. I'm trying to think. I wasn't necessarily in that role in Detroit because there were so many guys in the dressing room. I was there for 4 years, but whether it's with the Islanders or the Leafs or LA Kings, all different teams, in a lot of cases, I I was taking my teammates' side over the coach's side, and sometimes that wasn't necessarily viewed as a positive thing by coaching staff, and so um, I just it was I was more vocal in that sense. I would challenge coaches, and I don't think I did it necessarily for myself personally. I felt like I was when I did it, it was always for my teammates, for the team, and I would say I wore my heart on my sleeve too. I just it gets me in trouble with my wife too, as you can imagine. But some things are better left unsaid, I guess. But it was just there was I guess goes back to I'll blame Screwy for this. So I'll blame that he went in and did that, and it kind of it became a part of me. But
Yeah.
it's I things could have gone a lot smoother if I kept my mouth shut in different situations, I guess. But
Yeah.
I always felt that it was part of my responsibility as a leader on different teams, to be vocal and to express my opinion. So
Yeah.
sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't.
Yeah. Well, I mean, fair enough. I mean, but there's obviously there's an underlying passion there with you.
Yeah,
A passion for the sport, a passion for the game, a passion that came out, I'm sure, that helped you play as long as you did. And sometimes that, there's a knife edge there that you're
yeah,
walking, right? And it's going to show up in the interpersonal conflicts that happen. And I'm sure some of the coaches again respected it because they knew that was part of you. And some guys maybe weren't so fond of it. But it is a bit of the being authentic to you, I think, as a player. And I do think that's a very important aspect. There are things that we can mold and we do want to develop and grow, evolve, personal evolution. But there is just innate parts of us that I think we need to embrace, and allow to happen. Because when we're trying to be someone that we're not too, you know how that goes. Usually not
yeah,
very well, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks for coming on. I'm sure we could probably do this for another hour or two, but we
Yeah.
both got things to do. So I'll let you off the hook. Is there any last advice? My audience is usually hockey coaches, hockey parents. Kids that are moving up through the system that want a chance to play at some level of higher hockey, whether that be junior or NCAA. What maybe passing words would you give to the guys that are trying to follow in your footsteps?
Well, I think I'll try not to be cliched,
Yeah,
but sometimes it's hard to, because I mean the the truth is, what is it? Well, it's the top 1% ever end up playing in the NHL, or playing professionally, making a career, making a living out of. But having the dream to do it is certainly amazing. Certainly something extremely honorable to aspire to. But it's the lessons that you learn as an athlete, a hockey player, day to day, the work ethic, the camaraderie, the team around you, that translates into everything that you do, and helps you become a better person, a better coworker. And to me, there's no better life lessons than what I learned as a hockey player, and throughout my career. And so I think don't lose sight of that fact. The journey, everybody's got their own journey, and there are a lot of different paths, particularly in hockey, to becoming a professional player. And take all the lessons and learn from them, and apply them in everything that you do. And if you do that, you're going to be happy with yourself, and you're going to be successful. And that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I love it. I love it. I mean, that's really, you're echoing kind of what I say with what I do. If we can align, if you have a great big goal, I think that's amazing. Like a lot of us don't, right? So if somebody has a goal out there, love it. I love it. There's going to be passion, and there's going to be some, some rawness behind that. Now, if you can align your words and your actions with that goal, who knows what's going to happen, right? You might get there, you might not, but that alignment and that chase and that process is immensely invaluable with anything, right? Yeah. So that's what I'm just grateful for with my boys. Like they love hockey. It could have been anything. It could have been the ukulele. It doesn't matter to me, but they've chose to love hockey, and they've chose to get behind hockey, and they've chose to put their blood, sweat, and tears into it. And after that, I don't give a rip. Like they're already learning, right? Wherever they're going to end up, they're going to end up. But there's going to be a lot of lessons involved in that, and I'm glad it's a team sport as well, because you have to lean on others, and the accountability of that is important to me too. So, grateful for this game, grateful that it brought us together today, and hopefully we were able to share some lessons that are helping others out there. So again, Schneids, really appreciate you coming on, and we'll have to do it again sometime.
Thanks for having me. Great being on.
Thank you so much for being here for episode 142 of the Up My Hockey podcast with Mathieu Schneider as our special guest. Fantastic to be able to connect with Schneids again. It's been a long time. And boy, I really enjoy connecting with him. Smart guy, intellectual guy, well-spoken, well thought out answers, and really still connected extensively throughout the hockey world, not only with the PA and but also the alumni, and has his fingers in a few other ventures that we spoke about after. So great insights there from one of the game's best. Really one of the game's best to ever play. 1,289 games, was a valued defenseman wherever he went, an offensive contributor, and a solid teammate. So lots of good stuff for you to take away from that conversation, as I know you will. And I will leave you with that. So play hard and keep your head up. Till next time, I'm Jason Padolin with the Up My Hockey podcast. Cheers.